Hey, Elle. Did you want to give any opening remarks?
I can just cover a few logistics for people that want more information. So I'm Elle O'Casey. I'm with Agency of Natural Resources and have been helping folks on this project. I wanted to share a couple links with you in the chat so that you have those as resources. The first that I'll put in there is the link to the ARPA Webinar Series, so you can see what events are coming up throughout the month of November. And then the second are our ARPA web pages so that you can learn more about the funding specifics. And the third link I'll put in there is really important. It's our form that we're asking you to fill out if you haven't yet, to tell us more about the project that you're looking to fund. And it's our way to be able to keep in touch with you as we get updates and to learn more about what you're looking for. So I'll throw those in there now, and then Lynnette, feel free to take it away.
Great, thanks. I was hoping I could ask Mary Clark and Chris Rotler, who are on the call with us, to help monitor the chat for any questions, because once I start presenting, I won't be able to see the chat. Is that okay with Chris and Mary?
Sorry, Lynnette, with my broken arm, I may not be able to help quite as much. Hopefully Chris will be able to.
Okay.
And I can help too, Lynnette.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. So we are here today to talk about Vermont's American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. And the specific program we're talking about is developing community-scale wastewater and drinking water systems in unserved villages. My name is Lynnette Claudon, and I work for the Water Investment Division. Also here with me, I have my cat, who is geriatric and is having a hard time today. She's in palliative care. So if you'll please excuse her if she interrupts us at all. I'd like to make a couple introductions of people that you will need to know as you're working through your village projects. So there's me. Also, Megan Young is joining us towards the end of the presentation to be able to answer any of your drinking water questions. And then Neil Kamen is our Director in Water Investment Division. Neil, do you want to say hi?
Sure, Lynnette. Good afternoon to everybody who's joining us on this webinar. The reason Lynnette's introducing me, I am tasked with sort of overseeing program development for all of the agency's ARPA programs. There are 6 of them. And I got to say, this is one of the ones I'm just the most excited about, because the opportunities here to help designated villages build out and expand their wastewater and drinking water systems are really, really bright, and it just presents some great opportunities. So Lynnette, I'm going to turn it back to you. You've got this well in hand, but I am here if there are any questions.
Great, thanks. And also we have Patrick Monks and Tom Brown, who are available to answer questions about clean water and drinking water SRF for those folks that are ready for that financing. So I'd like to talk about the initiative. In terms of the Village Wastewater Initiative, we've been working on that for more than a decade, starting with work that Don Rubisky had done and Faith Inglesrud from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And the initiative has just grown over time. And now includes this new ARPA program. So there's an interagency village initiative committee, and I give my thanks to them. A number of them are on this call. I'd like to acknowledge Neil as our champion, and Mary Clark, Chris Rotler, Mark Johnson, John Aries, and the folks at ACCD that have filled in since Faith left. And also Celia Larson, formerly of the Health Department, and Anna Gallagher. So at the high level, this initiative intends to help meet our statewide planning goals for infill and redevelopment. But it's also about recovery, resiliency, and strong local economies. And as a bonus, it allows for improvements to public health and water quality. In terms of the ARPA funding available for the village effort, in this state fiscal year, there's an $8 million appropriation, and these funds will be allocated based on the priority list. We'll get to what the priority list is later. And then again, in state fiscal year 23 and state fiscal year 24, we anticipate additional appropriations. And the goal of this effort is to provide the financial support for communities to implement their water infrastructure projects at an affordable price. So the initial eligibility screening is in two parts. There's the first part, and then there's more complex part for both drinking water and clean water. You have to meet both the first criteria and either the second or third criteria, depending on clean water or drinking water. The first criteria is village designation. The villages receiving the village ARPA construction grants need to have received a village designation by ACCD. So if your village has already gone through that process, that's great. If you haven't, there's still time, and there's a link to the village designation program. The contact there is Richard Amore. So for community wastewater systems, we're looking for two additional criteria. First, that the projects are Clean Water State Revolving Fund eligible. And second, that the villages seeking wastewater funding are presently unsewered, meaning that they have individual septic systems. However, for drinking water systems, there are different criteria. The project has to be Drinking Water State Revolving Fund eligible. There has to be a documented public health risk, and we're looking to provide funding to unserved communities. There's not a existing municipally owned public community drinking water system. So how can you apply for the village ARPA grants? The first step is to complete the intake form that Elle put in the chat. As a result of completing the intake form, you should get a responding email with the project priority list application for either clean water or drinking water, depending on whether you have a wastewater or drinking water project. If for some reason you didn't get that form, you can get it from our priority list application page. We would also like to include the Water Investment Division project cost summary. And if we need any additional forms, we will request them if your project is in the fundable range. So the intake form looks like this. It's pretty simple, and it has 10 to a dozen questions. We're primarily using this intake form to understand who is interested in a project and how to contact them. The most important form is the project priority list form. Again, you should get the specific form when you answer the intake form, but you may also find that you need to get it off our website. If you do, the link is here. So again, if you have a wastewater project, you want to get the Clean Water State Revolving Fund priority list application. But if you have a drinking water project, you want to get the drinking water priority list application. The most important part of those applications are in the first 2 pages. In the clean water form, there are probably 100 questions. And I know this can seem overwhelming, but your engineer, if you have one, should be able to help you with it. And if you don't have one, you can always call and make an appointment to get some training on the form and to go over your questions together with us. This is the most important part of the form because this is where you're asking for the funding that you are needing and when you need it. So in our processes, we normally break things into 3 steps: the planning step, the final design step, and the construction step. And then funds can be awarded over time within the grant period. So it's important that you look at the schedule, which will be a couple slides further down, when you are completing this application, so that you know when the funds might be available. So the other really important part of the application is the project description. So we're going to ask you to include a little bit more in the project description than you might normally include on a priority list application. So please indicate that your project is interested in the ARPA funding and include the details of the project. Specifically for wastewater, have the soil test pits been done? Or for both projects, is there a purchase and sales agreement with the landowner, or does the municipality already own the land? With wastewater, does the project have a formal capacity determination? With drinking water, does the project have source approval? And lastly, in drinking water, include any requests for planning or final design funds because they don't have separate boxes from construction. We're also asking for the Water Investment Division project cost summary. This is a really big spreadsheet, and your engineer will help you with it.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? We're trying
Yes,
to figure out the link for this third project cost summary. I think you had it at the very beginning. I was just going to ask if Neil or Chris could put that link in the chat because I cannot copy it from here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll go find it.
Okay, thank you.
So again, don't worry about filling out this project cost summary because your engineer will be there to help you out with it. So the project priority list ranking is how we place projects on the priority list for the state revolving funds. There are separate lists for drinking water and clean water. And the projects will need to be in the fundable range for each of the funding sources that they are looking at. And being on the project priority list is needed for construction loans and grants and for land purchases. So when should you apply? We have an annual enrollment period for applications in the state revolving funds that is based on the state fiscal year. With the current ARPA opportunities, we've asked for a December 1st deadline to get on the priority list for state fiscal year 22. That's likely to be extended, but it hasn't been announced yet. So please try and get your application in for December 1st. That will get your project on the current intended use plan. And if your project is already on the current intended use plan, we can make awards for your project now. If you are applying, you can get on the amended intended use plan, which will be out later in early 2022. And the typical intended use plan end date is June 30, 2022 for this state fiscal year. So that process repeats, and the state fiscal year 23, the deadline will be towards the end of February of 22, and then the time when that money can be used is July 1st through June 30th, 22 to 23. And lastly, the last date to expend ARPA funds is December 31st, 2026. So any projects will need to be wrapped up by that date. How much you get for a grant will be determined based on affordability and median household income. Affordability is a metric used in the state revolving funds, which is a formula equal to the user rate divided by the median household income of the service area. And that metric, we look for it to be in a range of 1% to 2%. That range comes from a 1997 study on combined sewer service area affordability and rates. So with ARPA, we're intending to fill the funding gap that is needed to make these projects affordable. So in this graphic, we're looking at a project that's on the priority list, and they have a number of funding sources. So at this time, we're proposing that the ARPA grant be the larger orange slice of the pie. And however, the communities are still expected to fund a local share through a loan, either through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund or another source. So if you join the webinar and you don't think that your project qualifies for the ARPA funding, or if you're worried that your project might not be done in time to use the ARPA funding, please know that the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was just signed into law yesterday. That will put an unprecedented amount of money into the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds, and unprecedented levels of subsidy with those loans. So nationally, over the 5-year period, Congress appropriated almost $12 billion for clean water, and on the drinking water side, $12 billion for drinking water, and another $15 billion towards lead service line replacement. And lastly, I couldn't resist a little Village ARPA pun, and it's fun to talk about ARPA. So I will take questions at this time.
We had one question, Lynnette, about the current contacts for the drinking water SRF and the clean water SRF for IUP questions. I think Neil just put their contact information in the chat. Just wanted to let folks know that looks like it's Tom Brown or Patrick Monks.
Correct.
And then there was another question, if a town is already on the IUP, do they need to complete any of the steps that you mentioned so far?
So if you are if you're already on the list and you've made your application and you wouldn't want to change any of that information you submitted or add to it, then it's okay to leave it how it is. If you're on the future list, so there's two parts of the list. There's the one that's met. There's like the current list, and then there's a future list of projects that we're expecting to have in the next state fiscal year. So if you're on the future list, it's a good idea to update your application because you may not have completed everything previously. But if nothing's changed, we can reuse that application. But you should probably just let us know that you're interested in the ARPA funding.
Someone was wondering about the spreadsheet that was sent out for affordability. It said it included bond costs only, not O&M. So wondering if affordability is based on total annual cost with O&M.
It is based on total annual cost.
And then I forgot to mention at the beginning that the webinar will be recorded, and I'll put the recording up on the ARPA page tomorrow so that folks can watch it along with the PowerPoint slides. There was a question about support, wondering what support is available for a town that has not engaged in a PE yet. So
some of the towns have been using services from their regional planning commission. So depending on the funding source that the town's interested, there's a couple different options. The town can apply to have funding assistance, to have the RPC provide coordinating assistance. at a
And-
level of 25% of the total ask.
And then there was another question wondering if you could elaborate on that documented health risk required for drinking water eligibility.
Is Megan available?
I am here, and the short answer is that the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund, per the federal requirements, we are not allowed to use that state revolving loan fund money to develop new community water systems unless there's an immediate public health risk to the users from their own wells and their own water sources. So an example would be the town does not have a municipal system, a municipal community water system, and many of the wells that serve houses in the area, in the town area, are contaminated with PFOA and PFAS. And that's a public health risk, and therefore we can use the DWSRF funding to fund a community water system. It does not allow us to fund a community water system just because you have you don't have a town water system. Unfortunately, the only way we can use those funds is if there's a public health risk in the current household wells and springs and things like that. Looks like there was another question that just popped up about what about a problem with wells going dry? Again, it would have to be like a large number of the local wells are coming up dry, and so that there is no safe drinking water in that town, and therefore we could use the funds to support a community water system. But just one or two or three wells that have come up dry, that is not that does not give us the wiggle room that we need to be able to use that money to develop a community water system.
One question about manufactured housing cooperatives. If they're seeking to connect to municipal sewer, would the cooperative be able to fill out the application, or would they need to ask the town to do that?
So if they were looking for the town to sponsor them, they would need to fill out that application. We do have a separate ARPA program. I don't know if Neil, you want to mention it for those specific communities that might be a better fit. I don't know that would be a good fit for this village ARPA funding, but we do routinely fund those programs through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and it can be funded either as a private loan or as a loan to municipalities so that they can take advantage of some of our better funding options.
Lynnette, did you want me to answer on that additional program?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so the state is also running a program to assist manufactured home communities to meet multiple infrastructure needs, be they water, wastewater, or stormwater. And so depending on the fact pattern and what's at play, that may be an eligible, a hookup may be eligible. There's a couple of things. If the town were going to be extending a sewer line out to a manufactured home community, we would have to make a finding that the hooking that mobile manufactured home community up was addressing a documented water quality need. That's to say that their on-site system may be failing. At the least cost solution would be to extend the sewer line and connect. And in that case, it might be eligible under that ARPA program. And so the webinar series that you all are listening to right now, we will have a subsequent version that talks about the manufactured home communities shortly.
There was another one that talked about existing systems. So some of us have existing systems in general. Are individual entities within a town expected to apply to the town, or do we apply to federal sources as a subset of the town?
So if the town already has a municipally owned system in terms of, you know, a wastewater treatment plant or a community wastewater disposal system, we're really looking for individuals to be working with their towns to create new community systems, either for drinking water or for wastewater in this effort. Was that clear?
If anyone wants to take themselves off mute and ask your own questions, feel free to raise your hand. Is there a minimum number of users needed for ARPA to fund a community water system?
We have not set a minimum number of users. The smaller the number of users, the more difficult it becomes to make the project work, though.
So one of the requirements, again, for the DWSRF funding is that when the project is complete, the water system must have technical, financial, and managerial capacity to be a public water system now and forever. And, you know, the costs of being a public water system are great. And the fewer number of people you're dividing that cost by, the higher the rates are. And so a community water system is defined as 15 connections. So there's already 15 or more in order to become a public community water system. And B, in order to prove that you will, at the end of this whole thing, have technical, financial, and managerial capacity, the number of connections needs to be much higher than 15. And so it does depend on, you know, the water system and the area and the source water and what treatment you're going to need and all of those things. But the short answer is the more number of connections you have, the more you can divide the cost by in the long run, because the difference between one of the things that you need to consider is that there's always ongoing costs with public drinking water systems. There's the continual hiring of an operator, doing water quality sampling, meeting all of the federal and state regulations, as well as running the water system itself. And so those costs are pretty high. And so if you're going to have a community that is technically, financially, and managerial capable, then you need a large number of connections to divide that by.
For the CWSRF, can you clarify which list in the current IUP is the future list referenced earlier?
Yeah, so in the intended use plan, the very, very last page is the future list, and the second to last page is more of the active list.
The town of Grand Isle has received money already through ARPA. They're having a hard time getting an understanding of their plans for criteria for awarding those funds. Do you have any advice?
Oh gosh. The ARPA funds are pretty flexible in terms of being their eligibility for use with clean water and drinking water capital needs. So if Grand Isle has any of that existing capital infrastructure that needs improving, this is a good opportunity to do that. Outside of that, if you want to call about a specific project, Megan would be good to talk to for drinking water.
Neil, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, with the general question about how does a town sort through the eligibilities or make decisions about investments, we've been working hand in hand with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns because a lot of municipalities are very interested in that. And so for the questioner from Grand Isle, I would absolutely encourage you to engage with the league. There's an excellent web resource they have with a very robust Q&A that we've kind of worked together to develop. Won't take credit, it's their work, but we've been assisting with the water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure parts of that. So there's a lot of good information over there. And one of the best recommendations that I can echo from the league is for a municipality who's looking at various projects and how to use their own local ARPA support is to get a lot of input from your public, and there is time to make a decision. There's no need to rush into it. That said, if you want to put your funds into this program and help develop a village wastewater system, then definitely get on that interest list sooner rather than later.
And I see there's a note about the interest form. So the primary contact for the interest form could be a municipality or a consultant, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I would like to have contact information for both, if possible.
Does there need to be a documented health risk to qualify for the Clean Water SRF?
So for Clean Water State Revolving Fund, it's a little bit different. The major requirement is that in terms of being eligible for Clean Water State Revolving Fund money is you need to have a water quality benefit. The vast majority of wastewater projects undoubtedly have a water quality benefit just by the nature of being a wastewater project.
Great. And those are all the questions that I see in the chat. Again, if folks want to take yourself off mute and ask, please feel free.
I have a question.
Go for it.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned a number of connections to a public water, to a system that were like a minimum for it to be a public water system. Did you say 50 or 15? 15 or 50?
15. So the number is 25 users or 15 residential.
25 users or 15 connections?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, how do I mute myself?
We can do that for you. Don't worry about that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Clark?
Yeah, I just want to check the so the number of users is that drinking water or wastewater or both?
That's drinking water.
Yeah, that's the federal definition of a public community drinking water system.
Okay, and I do have one other question. So if a town wanted to connect to an existing wastewater system in another town, that would not be through this funding mechanism, but through the Clean Water Revolving Fund. Is that correct?
It's situational. So if your town is Moortown, right?
Right.
Then Moortown doesn't have its own municipal system. So a potential solution could be a municipal connection to another system.
Okay, so hypothetically, a connection to on part of our town into the Waterbury system would be eligible for an application.
Correct.
Thanks.
Thank you. Taylor?
Hi, Lynnette. Taylor with CCRPC. Could you explain again, why a municipality who's on that future list in the existing IUP should reapply to the priority list now instead of just waiting until next fiscal year's application?
So currently in our current state fiscal year, we have an appropriation of $8 million. So we would like to get that $8 million out in grant awards. And we currently don't have enough projects on the current list to use all of that $8 million.
So I guess my follow-up question is, you know, if I'm working on a project that's step one now that's already fully funded, you know, and there's potential that, you know, work on step two could start by the end of this current fiscal year. Is that would be a reason to reapply now, correct?
Yes, so that we can look at that in let's see. So we're really looking to take the information that's presented here, and if we don't have, if we're not able to make awards for the construction dollars, that we can take a look at making awards for planning and final design dollars from the information that we're gathering through this priority list process.
Okay. And if the community I'm working with, you know, isn't at a stage where it's ready to make a decision about whether or not it will pursue step two funding, it probably does not make sense to reapply, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Hi there, Lynnette. It's Gail Mann. I just learned about this meeting late, so I joined probably 10 minutes ago. Are we going to have access to the slides? Because there's a lot of information I've missed. Will we have that?
And it's being recorded, so Elle will post the recording as well. Great.
So when I heard about this interest list, do you know if Londonderry is on that list? Are we on it?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I can
we'll
check.
Okay, thank you.
I'll take a look.
I'll put the slides and the link to the recording up on the page that I just put in the chat, Gail. So that will be up there tomorrow if you want to go back and look at those. There was a question about whether environmental justice issues are addressed in the eligibility parameters.
So we're primarily looking at affordability as the major metric in terms of how much money is awarded, and we're trying to get at some of those issues specific to lower income residents through that affordability analysis when we're looking to make the award.
Lynnette?
Yep.
I can respond to Gail's question about is Londonderry on the list.
Oh, please.
Sure, Gail, there is an entry from an individual with respect to what looks like a relatively smaller sized project to rebuild electrical panel boxes used at an individual wastewater system. It sounds like it's a private community system that's been in place for a while. If this is what you've got in mind, then it's in here. And if it's not, then please definitely get something on the list. My sense is you're dealing with the larger set of issues in Londonderry that I'm aware of. So.
Yes, we are. Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
great.
Now, we have two community systems we need to get on the list. Okay, we'll get on that. Thank you.
And that's all that I see in terms of questions. So there's one person wanted to know if it's possible to see what towns have projects on the list.
Yeah, we could post the the intended use plan in the chat. So on the current list, Montgomery, and Westford are listed, and there's several on the future list. I think Greensboro, Highgate, and at least one other town.
Is that something you're able to pop in the chat, Lynnette, or do you want to have someone else share that?
I'll take care of it.
Okay,
That'd be
thanks.
great,
Neil.
thanks.
Go for it, Peter. Thanks.
I'm backing out, and I have been a teacher, and I try to always tell my students there are no dumb questions. So with this new money that has come in, that was just approved yesterday, certain amount going to Vermont for water systems, blah, blah, blah. Does each town get allocated a certain percentage of that total amount, and then the town handles the how to parse that out? Or is I mean, I've seen this, thank you for that. I've seen the little blue sheet and I've looked at that, but so say, for example, if a town did not apply for any of this water, and there were 10 other towns that did apply, is it just spread out by population or something? Or I'm just trying to, it's just so complicated.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a great question. I apologize that it's complicated. So in terms of this new Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act money, this will be administered through our Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. So to make things easier, we've chosen through this ARPA process to use all the same tools in our toolbox that we use for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, largely because we're all the same staff working on everything. And we want to make sure that we're getting we're aware of all the projects that are out there, and we're getting the best financial packages out to each of the communities. So in terms of the direct appropriation, there's not a direct appropriation to the towns or counties this time around with this Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act money. It's just going to the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. So of the figures that you see here on the clean water side, Vermont gets a little bit less than 0.5% of that money. And then on the drinking side, we get 1% of the money.
Okay, thank you. Now, and one, I always attend things like this, then I'm like, why didn't I ask this or what? Can you put we depend a lot on VLCT, and thank you, Neil, who I think addressed some stuff there. And we also rely a lot on Vermont Rural Water. Is that possible in the chat thing to just list the most likely person to speak with at those organizations, so a dummy like me can remember who to go to? I mean, so many of us, I'm on the board of our local water system. I'm not a paid person, and it's just trying to parse through all this stuff is we really appreciate the work you guys are all doing to help explain this, and it just takes time and effort. So thank you all.
Take a look at that chat, sir.
What's the minimum a town needs to do to get on the priority list? How much information do they need to provide? What if a project is just in the early discussion stages with no formal plans?
So if you haven't applied for any money at all and you are just starting planning, you can still apply for planning money through this process. There are several, if we aren't able to make an ARPA award for the planning money, there are opportunities through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund through a loan with 100% loan subsidy up to $125,000. or through the engineering planning advanced program.
Is a documented water quality issue in wells the only route for eligibility for the drinking water SRF?
Megan?
Yes, pretty much. And the federal requirements make it so that we cannot use DWSRF money to farm a community water system unless it is to address an immediate public health risk.
This is Gail Mann again, Londonderry. So if we've identified a hazardous waste situation that we want to clean up, is there any money available for that? It is right next to the West River.
It depends on the waste. There are programs available through our brownfields program through the Waste Management Division. Clean Water State Revolving Fund does have eligibilities for contaminated sites, but they're loan dollars. So they're typically the last dollars used for that type of project.
Okay, so we're better off with brownfields.
Yeah, I would call and ask them.
Okay.
Neil?
Yeah, thanks, Gail. I'd add that the Infrastructure Act, while we're not looking at it specifically within Water Investment Division, there is a tremendous amount of hazardous waste cleanup dollars and brownfields money in that act as well. So that would be the good folks that you know over in the Waste Management and Prevention Division. Trish Coppolino, I imagine you've engaged with her before.
No, we're just starting. We didn't know really where to go. So
Yeah.
Who was that person again?
I'll put her contact in there.
In there? Okay, great. Thank
yeah.
you.
Thanks, Neil.
Neil, you might want to speak to this as well. Someone was wondering whether stormwater is included in this.
It is not. Stormwater is not included in this village water and wastewater program. However, if the stormwater that we're talking about is to comply with the 3-acre stormwater permit that's required for the Lakes Champlain and Memphremagog basins, then there is in fact an ARPA program for that. So the same fact sheet, the same website resources that Elle had put in the chat right up top can bring you to that program and a specific interest indicator form for the 3-acre stormwater. It is being operated in a very different manner than this one, but there is funding for that.
Thank you. Are the ARPA funds the same as the $125,000 forgivable funds program dollars?
No. So the Clean Water State Revolving Fund has loan forgiveness as a way to administer subsidy. We do this as a way to streamline paperwork. So we don't call our opportunities grants. As you can see in this slide, it allows 40% of zones, 49% of funds will be available for grants or loan principal forgiveness. If we administer these as grants, there's a lot more paperwork than if we administer them as loan principal forgiveness. So you'll often hear us use the term subsidy or loan principal forgiveness or add sub, which stands for additional subsidy, to talk about those. But when we're talking about subsidy and that $125,000 opportunity, that's through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which is separate from ARPA. All of our staff is the same.
And is it possible to use reports of testing results at a person's town's small water system to document a public health risk? And wondering if there are thresholds.
So for what we are talking about, these ARPA funds are available to communities that do not have a municipal town water system. So I'm not really sure what the question is, because it sounds like this town has a public water system. So I think that might eliminate that question. But if you have more to that question, feel free to jump in and let me know, and maybe I'll be able to answer it.
Taylor?
Lynnette, could you go back to the slide previous to this real quick? Actually, sorry, one more. One more. One more. Sorry, I thought it was much more recent. Okay. I'll probably follow up with an individual question about a community later, Lynnette, about step 2, but I can't quite formulate it right now, so I won't take up your time.
Okay.
And that's all I see for questions.
Well, let me just jump in here. It looks like the person did respond and said that the water system that they were talking about is a small private water system. And so going back to the question that they originally asked, you know, if the town is interested in becoming a public community water system, and there are documented water quality issues in the area, then you can absolutely use those results. The thresholds are, you know, all the federal requirements for water quality. And again, you sort of have to go in thinking, the town would have to go in thinking that about that technical, financial, and managerial capacity of how many connections the town would want their community water system to be, and can they afford to be a public community water system. So that's really where the limitations come from, is really that the town as a municipal system, you know, being able to be technically, financially, and managerially capable when this public water system has been built and installed and is now up and running.
All right, and as I mentioned before, the website that I put in the chat a couple different times will have the recording and the PowerPoint tomorrow. Lynnette, if you want to say anything you might have missed or next steps, feel free.
I think I would just encourage everybody to apply, to fill out the intake form, to start out on their project priority list application, and to just get started with things. There's a lot of money flowing into Vermont, and from the federal government, both through the ARPA opportunity that we have now, but also through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So there's not a better time to get started with this. And just because you do the planning or do the design doesn't mean you necessarily have to build the project. You can work towards getting ready to have the project built.
Great, thanks. And in case anyone missed any of the links or has additional questions, once you go to that webpage, you'll be able to find our contact information, both our phone numbers and our email addresses, so we can make sure to get you what you need.